Now we also have an int layer, and this is where your get cust. Yes, this is created. And all those, the request and response parameters that we have added. So this is your request parameter. What is it? It is customer identifier is the request parameter for your connector, which is of the type text. Whereas here, if you observe, so your query, yes, the customer identifier. And what about the response? Okay, so if you see all these things that I've added for the student data type, right? Sorry, the customer data type, isn't it? Yeah. So the CID, age, address, date of birth. So all of these have been created as part of the Pega data class. Okay. So these are my query string parameters, and what is there on get customer. So I have page data, where again I see all these details corresponding to the customer data type. And how are these created? Because you have given a service REST sample for it, saying that this is how my response would be. And accordingly, the system has generated the response parameters. Okay. The request parameters as CID that you have given as part of the wizard, the second screen that you have given, I got the customer identifier. Okay. Then what is there on the data class? Let's see. XYZ data get cust. So on the organizational level data class, you see get cust. So a D page is created, D underscore get customer. And what do you see? There is a connect REST called get customer, which is created. Right? So the connector that we have created is sourced to a particular D page, and the request and response data transforms are also configured. Right? Here you will see the identifier, the CID. Yes. So this is for setting in the customer identifier on the request parameter, whereas the outcome is for mapping the response. Okay. So what is being mapped? So the values from the response. So you'll be able to see this, the data source. And what is the source? What is the type of it? Just get customer, and this is going to be a response parameter. Once you expand this, and if you remember, this is the data, right? The page data is what we have seen. So each of that is being mapped onto this particular data transfer. So you see all the CID, address. So both the request and response parameters are there in my D page, and the source is going to be your connect. And again, I'll be able to see the data transforms in here, and all the properties are created in here. So, I mean, the system has created all of this for me. I've just run through the wizard and I got here. So everything seems good. And maybe I'll go ahead and I can close this. Okay. Now, where can I see the instance? I mean, I would like to have a look at the instances of all the connectors. Where can I see that? And yes, all these connectors are supported. Let's see the connect REST that I've just created. Yes, get custom. Let's have a look directly on the connect rest rule. Still loading. Not loading. One time just. Systems once. It's like so. Okay, yes. So this is how the connectors that we have created get customer looks like. Okay, the one obvious thing is going to be the endpoint URL. Okay. So onto which URL should I hit using my connect rest? Okay. Then you have a lot of other features onto the connector where things related to connection timeouts, I mean, or then you might have things related to error handling. What if something went wrong, or things related to simulation. A lot of things are available on the connector. And yes, here are your methods. The get method, the request, customer identifier which we have given. Where is it mapped? Because this is also a Pega application, right? So understand that the connector is also created on a Pega application only. So you'll see that again clipboard. So where is it mapped from? The user enters something, or somewhere in the case cycle, be it your work class or somewhere, the data is provided onto the clipboard, and that is mapped from where? From your request query customer identifier. So from this particular value, we are mapping in the data. Okay, and this is from the clipboard. Whereas the response. So where does the response come from? Once your request here is submitted, this goes to the service, right? And on the service, you see it is mapped to the clipboard of the second application. It is mapped to a particular key. Then your service activity is invoked, and then comes the response. So where's your response in? It is from the clipboard to the customer data. From here, it goes back to the connector again, and here it would be tracked as the response. And where is it coming from? It is mapped to a particular XML file, and this is where your response is going to. I mean, you are correlating the entire transition of data, right? Like from the connector to the service, and data manipulation or business logic happens. Then from the service back to the connector.
Can you explain this path again? I got confused in between.
Okay. Okay.
Uh,
Okay. So first, your initiation of this integration happens from the connector, right? The first thing would start from the connector. Agreed? I mean,
yes.
connector first invoke. So I need to send in some data to the connector first. And where is that happening? It is mapping from the clipboard and on one of the property. Just like we had CID earlier, this is one of the property. Assume it like that. Now from here, where does the control go? It goes and invokes the service. Correct? Which means another application. Completely understand it as a different application. Okay? And on the service, what is happening? The request that is coming from the connector, that request is mapped onto your Pega application to a property called CID. And where is it? On the clipboard. Okay? Then your service activity is invoked, all the business logic is performed. Then your output is on the response of the service here, which is on the clipboard. It is on customer data. Agreed? Now this has to be
Yes.
sent to the connector again, right, as a response. Yes. So then your customer's response comes in here. So the response that you got from the service REST is mapped to this particular property on the connector related application. Just Pega data, and it is on the response parameter. When the transition of data happens, connector, service, business logic, then service, and again connector. Maybe I'll put it this way. Let me just put it in the notepad. Yeah. So first thing what happens is from the connector, your request parameter would come. Okay. Then your service would be invoked and the request parameters are mapped. Right. Then your actual service activity, which is your business logic or whatever, that would be executed. Then the data should be mapped from where? From the service response. Okay. And then finally it goes to the connect response. I mean, now is it better? You understood the life
Yes.
cycle, no? How the data is
Yes.
transitioned. Yes. So request, we can have this connector used across multiple places. I mean, I can use it, I can invoke this from an activity, or I can invoke this from a data page, depending upon how you would like to use it. And how can I do it on the activity? I have a method called, I mean, in fact, there are a lot of methods related to the activities. Okay. We have methods specific to the connect related. Yes, so you see, all of these methods are relating to calling your connectors from an activity. Again, call a connect rest. Make sure the right parameters are given. So you see, what is your service name? What is your endpoint URL? What is the method? Right? And what is the execution mode that you are looking at? So this will enable you to call a connect rest from an activity. Okay. Likewise, you can also call it from a D page. Okay. We have a couple of D pages, isn't it? But nothing specific to customer. What do we have? Okay, great. Okay, right here, I would be able to add a connector. Yes. Okay, so here I have the get customer, which I can use as a source for one of my data pages. Make sure your request and response parameters are mapped correctly. Okay, so just like we have seen on the earlier page that is explicitly created for this purpose, we have seen that. So using these two, exposing your application as a service or invoking a service from your application as a connector, both are handled in two different applications ideally. So that's all about connectors. Are we good with this? Any questions?
No questions for now.
Okay, great. Then, but okay, we have discussed the creation of service, and we have also discussed the creation of the connectors. But assume they are handled by two different separate applications. They are handled by two different development teams, and they are still in progress. But how would I test whether they are working or not? Suppose I started building a service. Okay, the connector is still in progress. It's still not complete, but I would like to test my service. How would I do it? Or maybe vice versa. My connector is ready, but my service is not yet ready. I would like to test my connector. Then how would I approach? So that's when we go for simulating the integration data. Right? So there are certain options that we can choose whether when the corresponding ones are not available. Maybe I am building a connector but service is not available, or I'm building a service but connector is not ready. Right? So we would talk about simulating the integration data. Right? So there are three quick ways of how you can simulate the data here. Okay. So one is you can simulate a D page directly. For example, simulating a D page. Let's assume ideally this is your D page where you are looking at a connector to source this D page, but the connector is not ready, or probably the service is not up and running or whatever. Through this, I'm not able to retrieve any data for now. What can I do is I can simulate my data source. Okay. So you can use these options for simulation. So it could be a data transform, could be a lookup, a report definition, or an activity. So if it's a data transform, I can add in some simulation data and I can work on it. If it's an activity, maybe I can try to reach out to any other connectors, or if that is also not available, I can set up some data on the activity. Yes. Can I simulate a data source? Yes. You're simulating a D page here on this context. Now here if you observe, so I have different data sources available. For example, if you observe this, it says simulate data source, but I've got a couple of data sources already available. Right? One's Pega and one is robotics. Let's see what do we have in it. So this is just a data source that is built on the Pega directly, and I can use it for the simulation. In fact, I can create my own data source also. I can create my own data source. Data source is nothing but it's like a system where you can have your sample data and all of it. Okay. So this if you see it, it doesn't consist of any data and so if you see the name just says it is an integration system called the sample. Okay, but it doesn't consist of any data as such. But how do I see what is involved in this? Is can go to configure, can go to data model. So there's an option called view external data entities. So here you can see how each of your page is sourced. Yes. So here you see there's a customer data type where I have 3 data pages. And what is the source? Source is Pega currently. And here is your legend where you can see is there any simulated data here? Right? And what is the source of it? Is it lookup? Is it report? Is it connector activity? You get to see this. For each of the data page, you see the data is available. Likewise, if you are trying to simulate it using a sample or something, you will see the source system as sample. And yes, all these data pages, be it your single list or savable, you can see what is it sourced from. So this
But in sample, we don't have any data.
Correct. On sample, we did not have any as such. Correct.
Then how it will take?
Like for example,
Like if we save the sample one and we come here and we'll look into it. So we'll
okay, but
get the
sample, let's see, that sample has to be added, and you should also make sure add a what is this? The customer data, right? A sample DT has to be created because that's what I'm simulating in here. Okay, if you observe, it's part of the data dash customer. Okay, here I'll be able to set in my records. I mean, likewise, I can add in all the ones required for this particular simulation. Because this is for a single record, only one entity should be fine. If I go back to my D page, yes, here is my sample DT, and where is it pointing to? To sample system. Let us save it. Created. I think this is not saved. Right? Yeah. Okay, now a sample system is created. Then I'll. Okay. Yes, I do see this. Now we'll save. Okay, if I look at the external data entities now, let's refresh. Yes, I've just saved this sample. Then I went back to the D page and I used the sample that I've just created, saved it. Then I'll look at my external entities. Let me refresh. Okay, so I see sample. Yes. And you see the data page called a single instance of customer is being associated using a simulated data source. Okay, whereas the rest are all part of the Pega data source. Okay, I mean, data source is not a, I mean, it's just an entity. It doesn't have any logic or anything inside it. It's just an entity. Okay, so now you see that this is coming from the simulated data source, and that too from a data transform, which is sample data. Okay, so probably the easiest approach of simulating your connector is from the data source. Okay, so here what I did is, instead of a connector, I simulated the data source entirely, because my connector is not up, or my service is not up, my connector is not ready, whatever reasons, I've simulated my D page directly. So the other way is, suppose your connector is ready, but your service is not yet up and running. So in that case, I can directly simulate my connector also. For example, okay, let me look at the connectors. So there are a lot of connectors available on the system by default. So on this screen, you can see all the data related to the connectors. Okay, and even the one that we have just created would also be available. Yes, these are the, yes, all the existing connectors, and rest I have 63. And for each of the connector, you get to see the name of it, the number of simulations associated with it. And what about the one we just created? Something like get customer, right? Okay, I think it's looking from the class. So our class is what? XYZ. Okay. So probably towards the end somewhere. Yeah, yes. Here it is. Get customer, and currently 0 simulations. So no simulations on this connector. But what if I would like to add simulation? How would I do it? So you can see the simulations on the end. So currently no simulations were defined. Okay, but if I would like to define a simulation, click on this. Okay, so again, an activity is being used. I can use an activity to simulate the data that is coming to your connector. Okay, so you can define an activity. And we'll talk about the scopes also, but just let's create an activity first. And where should I create it? Obviously in the class that I have the connector. So where is it? This is the class, right? HRS int get cust API. So here is my activity created. And here, just like what we did in the data transform, similarly, I can set in some data, some property set, or depending upon the kind of data that you're handling on it. So here what you get is the request and the response. So ideally, both of them has to be mapped by us only, just like writing your test case. You give the assumptions, right? You give the assertions, and you decide what if it goes right or what if it goes wrong. So everything is provided by us. Similarly here also. So both have to be defined by us. So your query request parameter is 101. What about the response? You can also set the response. My activity is available. Simulation activity. Let me go back. Just close few of this. If it doesn't appear, just we can directly add it. And you can assign a restriction for your simulation activity. Is it on the global, or you would like just for the user session? Right? Global as in it would be applicable for all the users of your application, whereas user session is specific to your requester session alone. Let us save this. So the first way is we simulated a data source. Now the second way is we simulated the connector. Okay. So yes, now you have a connector, and you can see here number of simulations. One active session simulation is there. There are no global simulations. You can also test the connectivity. Okay, you see the status says good, and we did not give any response data, right? But request data is given, but we did not give any response data so far. So it just says data-customer, but nothing on the data. But if you would have mentioned the response parameters also, you will see the same data available on the, same data when you test the connectivity of your connector, right? It's just that both are given by us, both the request and response. Okay. What all we have seen as first part of the simulation. First thing is we have simulated the data source or the data page, okay, using simulate data page. Okay. And the second one we have done is we have simulated a connector using simulation activity. So here the activity is the core, right? Because we have done the simulation through the activity itself. Simulate, sorry, this is data source. Okay. Then, so these two hold good if I am dealing with a connector side. Okay. If I'm dealing with the connector related application, these two hold good. But what if I'm dealing with the service application? My service is ready. Then, or I'm dealing with the service application, then how would I simulate it? Okay. So then you can simulate your service using the integrator activity. For example, the core here on your application is your service, right? Is your service activity. What if I don't have this, or my service is not yet up and running? What can I do? Is I can simulate a service activity. So here, this might not have the actual data, or it might not have the actual business logic. So I can just simulate it, just like how I did on the simulation activity. Similarly, I can simulate a service activity, and I can check the service whether it's running or not. Right? I mean, different ways on how you would like to simulate your data. One is your service activity, or you can call it the integrator activity. Okay. So wherever you don't have any data, you can always go ahead and simulate it. It could be a data page, it could be a connector, or it could be in the service directly. Okay. If it's a data page, I can simulate the data source instead of a connector. If it's a connector, I can add in a simulation activity if I don't have the actual data. And then finally, if my service activity is not defined yet, I can write a simulation for it also. Yeah. These are the different ways you can simulate your uh, data on the integration aspects, be it on the service side or be it on the connector side. Are we clear with this simulation part?
Yeah, the data page one is very much
Hmm.
clear. The
Okay.
second connector one, I'll try this once, maybe
Okay.
probably tomorrow.
Okay.
When we'll
Hmm.
revise, then it will be more clear for
Sure,
me.
sure. So the same logic that you follow in the connector, I can follow it on the service activity also. Probably my business logic is not yet ready or it's not working. I can create a simulation activity and I can, add some sample data. I can see how my application or how my service is running. Just that simulation is always about kind of mimicking the actual environment. It's not the actual data, but you're trying to mimic it.
Okay.
So try to have a look at the connectors and the simulation aspects that we have discussed. In case there are questions, we can catch up tomorrow.
Yeah, sure, Sneha.
Okay. Yeah. So any other questions? Are we good?
No questions for now.
Sure thing. Okay. So I think then that is all from my side as well. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for joining. Good